Here we go. Welcome to a discussion with Julia Cartwright about cohesive communities. So this is related to the situations that we are finding ourselves in this current climate. We're just going to go through a few social, political, and economical points of views here, and just see where the conversation goes. So, Julia, welcome to this first podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Sean. I'm great. I'm currently in Bali, where I'm living in the heart of an intergenerational community. And it's an amazing experience to be able to witness and partake every day the benefits of from the very young to the frail to the strong, and how they actually live and work together in such a way that they might not have very much economically, but they have a huge amount in terms of resilience and support to weather many storms. They've been telling me their stories of what it's been like here in Bali during COVID, and how actually when the island shut down economically, they were all able to go back home to their families, to their lands, to their rice fields, and be supported without actually being too distressed by the situation. So being here and living it and observing it, it's a reminder to me of my own childhood and upbringing, where I was brought up in a small rural community in Somerset, but intergenerationally, and what that gave me in terms of an inner stability and resilience, which has allowed me to weather all the storms of my life. So it's been a time of reflection where I've been able to really study and experience what a cohesive community really means, and how we can take that learning forward as our own civilization in Western Europe is crumbling.
Yes, yeah. There's going to be a lot of changes, and I suppose that's one thing. What they say, change is one of the is the only constant in the universe. So people are going to have to adapt, and I suppose that in terms of adapting, you have to. There's two ways to face the future, isn't there? One is with apprehension, the other one is with anticipation. And if you're anticipating the future, it means you're being positive about it because you're being constructive. And I guess that's one thing that everybody has to realize. It's people's attitudes that actually it's the two part of the brains I think they need to realize. They've got their amygdala, which is all self in consideration for others, and then the hippocampus, which is what can we do together? How can I improve somebody else's life and at the same time improve mine as well? And one way of doing that is getting on with people of different generations. As you've said, point one here, intergenerational members. So
Yeah.
let's have a talk about that and your ideas about that.
Well, I think that the words I like to use are connection and disconnection. If we just take this from a historical perspective in our Western modern world, as we went in from an agricultural way of life into an industrial way of life, not only did we become disconnected from the land and the way that we live very closely to the land, but we also became disconnected to our wider community. Families were split up, they went to the cities. And I'm a psychologist, and I study trauma. I know a lot about trauma. And when you actually get into the study of trauma, you realize that it's about disconnection, because we're healthy human beings when we're connected, and that's connected physically as well and within networks. So one of the things that I do in terms of my teaching, what I have been doing in France, is I've been running something called a sacred meditation. That's just a way to get people in. But actually, it was a whole program about reconnecting. And we reconnected at a very simple, subtle level that's available for everybody, which was around eye contact and touch and voice. And what was shocking to me is how uncomfortable people have become because of our modern world and our technology in making eye contact and just the human touch. So one of the techniques I would use is that we would stand couple to couple, or two people who probably didn't know one another very well, and we would spend time literally with our hands on the other person's heart and making eye contact and breathing. And just that simple gesture helps to connect human energies, human spirits, human souls. And when you don't live physically close to people, then you don't have an opportunity to do that. And you've lost that skill, you've lost that ability. It's not that it's not inherent in us, it is, because, we are tribal people. And we just need to help people remember that and come together to do it. Because people will have to come out of their comfort zones, but they're going to need the support to actually do that.
Yeah.
Change is uncomfortable, and we don't just do it in our heads, we do it in our physical space of our bodies. So, this is part of what I teach. I call it resilience, but actually, it's a way of enjoying being together again within physical proximity, and the fact that we might end up having less materially, but we end up having so much more as a humanity and a feeling of being human. And I think for me, when you live intergenerationally, you know what it is to be the best of your humanity.
Yes, yeah. And again, just relating this back to the modern day and technology and all that, it's amazing. I suppose the older generation would probably be more reliant on the younger generation just to show them how to use things like mobile phones. Bitcoin in particular that's coming along. They'll want to know what that is. How do you use it? You know. So the younger people are gonna have well, I suppose in order to have patience with someone, you have to understand them. So if they can understand that the older generation is kind of like, well, look, I've been through a lot, but this is new, and this is kind of what the younger people are interested in. So therefore, rather than looking at it as a chore, it's more of a responsibility. The young people then need to integrate the old people, and the old people need to pass the wisdom down, and the younger people need to pass the wisdom up. Fair trade.
Yes, and I think that's really good for all of the generations. So, I'm sort of an older person, but I've educated myself with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I spent 3 months last year down in Portugal with the digital nomads to understand exactly what this is about. And the reason I wanted to educate myself was to understand the knowledge that I need, but also how all of this fits into the bigger ecosystem. Because the thing that also older people have, they've got a lot of experience of literally life itself, surviving through difficult times. They can grow food, they can cook, they can manage their finances. They've known a lot about relationships and child rearing. And so I think that it's mutual respect. One of the things that's concerned me over the last decade, probably, because when I had my life in Oxford and I lectured undergraduates and I have my own grown up children, is how there was a malaise created between the generations. Now, I don't know whether that was intentional, and I know every generation has its differences, but I feel that for the millennials and maybe for Gen Y, they're quite angry with the baby boomers because they perceive them as being the generation that's had everything. That isn't true, but in terms of maybe what's deemed important, maybe, I don't know, more material things or shorter working day, but that's another way to divide. And I think that the reason we need to come back to intergenerational living is to show that we are not divided. We have found a way to come together to be joined. And also, we need to teach the younger people what it's like to be a wise elder. We need circles of wise elders to actually come together to help the decision making. Not that one is more important than the other. Everybody has got something to contribute. But if you look at the tribal elders, they over generations have held the tribe together. When you've got a kind of a young dude who's going off and doing something that actually isn't helpful to the tribe, they don't exclude that young dude. They bring that young dude into the circle of the tribe. The best
What does
example I
this
have
mean
is
to
the
you?
Lakota tribe in the States. They have gone back to introducing a lot of the old rituals towards the coming of age with their young men, because what they discovered is that when the young men go through these tribal rituals, they feel part of the community. They feel that the community is taking them seriously and wants them to be part of it and take the responsibility of a mature adult. And we have lost those rituals in our Western culture,
Yeah,
much to
yeah.
our detriment. Much to our detriment. What I notice with my own offspring is that in terms of maturity, I would say they're 10 years out of kilter to what I was in my generation around responsibility. And it means that actually we are an immature society. And one of the things that I feel that this process of being a cohesive community is about going forward is about a maturation so that we can be responsible, all of us together, for the big changes that we're going to have to embrace and do it with grace and wisdom.
Yes. Yeah. So how did I was just I don't know if you heard a little bit of music popping up there. I was just searching for these digital nomads that you mentioned in Portugal.
In Lisbon, yeah.
How was your experience with them, and what are they?
Yeah, so basically, because I'm quite visionary, I see that Lisbon is going to emerge as a very important financial centre in the future, probably away from London and New York, because the digital nomads are really, they were making use of the fact that with technology, it means that you can work from anywhere. So the reason a lot of them have congregated in Lisbon is because the tax laws in Portugal are very conducive to being a digital nomad. It's a country that's wanted to encourage particularly young people to come and live there because Portugal has got an aging population. And so they want to have more young people in their economic makeup. So it's created a positive environment for digital nomads to actually come and gather. What I observed about it is that they had lost their ability to actually connect with people outside of that sphere.
Mm,
So when we talk about cohesive communities, what I'd like to be doing with that digital nomad community, and by the way, I see it here in Bali. Bali is another country which it has encouraged the establishment of a lot of digital nomads, but they're kind of out of kilter with the bigger picture. They
mm,
tend to kind of sort of stay together, and that doesn't necessarily show them or teach them what it's like to live in an intergenerational community. And one of the reasons that a lot of digital nomads congregate in places like Portugal and Bali is they also know that land is cheap. So they have this vision of making enough money to buy land and establish a community. But their understanding of what community is very limited.
mm,
So what a lot of I see a lot of them wanting to do is to get together and buy land with people of their same background and same age. And we know from our study of intentional communities that when you do that, they don't last for longer than 5 years.
mm,
So I'm part of the Global Eco Village Network, and I work with people who are experts in the study of communities, and that's just a research fact. So there is a program that you can take part in. It's called Dragon Dreaming. And Dragon Dreaming is actually when people want to live in community, you go through a program to really test, have you got all of the skills and attributes to make it sustainable? And the thing that always isn't sustainable is the human factor.
yeah. No surprise there. Crikey. I guess
Yeah.
would you say that would you say that that also though comes with age? Because I mean, I've certainly found as I've got on, I've changed, I've calmed down a lot. But I suppose the reason I've calmed down a lot is because I've you go through these experiences when you're younger, and you learn from them, and eventually kind of like you just become exhausted from it, and that's when you're just like you don't need that high anymore. Whereas when you're young, you're sort of you're looking for that excitement, and then it's only when you get older and you're like, actually, you know what, that excitement comes with stress, and I don't need that anymore. I've been there, done it, got the t-shirt sort of thing.
Well, I think that the starting point for me in terms of a cohesive community is about well being, health and well-being.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that whole umbrella, and we
Yeah.
absolutely know, even in studies in the UK. So when I was doing my, my training sort of at university, there were lots of things that I read about, for example, the East End of London. So the East End of London, before the Second World War, was historically poor materially,
Mm.
but it's a very cohesive society because people live together in very close contact with their kith and kin. And at the end of the Second World War, when some of those places got bombed out and people were moved to new towns, what they noticed is that their overall health and well-being deteriorated, because all of those old ties of living very close to one another, and that proximity is called propinquity. So when you have a situation of propinquity where you're living physically close to another and you can borrow sugar, over the garden
Yeah.
fence,
Yeah. Yeah.
that actually creates strong bonds of community, but it creates well-being. So Dr. Christiane Northrup, she says community is immunity. It protects us from a health point of view. So I would even go back to the basics and say a healthy society is one that's connected intergenerationally. And when you study indigenous cultures, which I do, that's what you will see. So, for example, here in Bali, people live into their 80s and 90s, and they're very healthy. They're still working on the land. They're still looking after the younger children. They're teaching the children how to grow rice. They're teaching the children the importance of ceremony and how
Mm.
important it is to have something sacred or spiritual in everyday practice around gratitude.
Mm.
So it's healthy. Fundamentally, it's healthy. I've worked with some people in Scotland who run a charity around drug and alcohol abuse, and their findings are the same. That the level of disconnection is in direct correlation to the level of alcoholism and drug taking. So when you can actually get people back together again, sharing food, sharing creativity, making things,
Mm.
then you actually have a healthy society which is balanced. And what's happened is that our society in the West has become very out of balance. And that is an overall theme. We're out of balance with one another. We're also out of balance with Mother Nature and the soil and the land.
Yeah, it's one thing that I think has actually created that. Again, I'm just going to bring this back to the money system. When you're using a medium of exchange that is declining in value, it means you have
Mm.
less and less value, and therefore you either have to work longer and longer hours, or sell more and more products to stay profitable and in business. And so it takes that time away from the family. Whereas if you're using a medium of exchange that behaves much like an asset, that actually increases in value because it's infinitely divisible rather than inflated, that is going to bring time back into people's lives. They're not literally just going to have to work themselves to the bone, in a
But
financial system that
yes,
is rigged effectively.
yeah, and it also brings back, and this is a topic, for more detail another day,
Mm.
is trust. And when you have a community that really is more of a gift economy, or what I call a trust economy, all of
Mm.
that dynamic shifts. So I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was growing up in Somerset, people had very, very little money. But what they did have is that they had the things that they grew in their garden, the chickens that they kept, the bees that they kept. So there was a constant exchange of goods. So literally everybody was well fed. And
Mm.
there was always a tradition that you never left your house without something in your basket. So whenever I go anywhere, I always take something with me because it's in my bones. And it's been so easy for me here in Bali to live with a Balinese family because that's how they still live. Yeah. So I've come home to the rituals of actually my indigenous people on the Somerset levels. And my most other recent example is I live in rural France. And last year, after I came back from Portugal, and I was looking at the markets, and I thought that we might have a crash last year, and that banks might stop giving money out from ATMs, or I might have trouble transferring money into my French account from the UK. And I was having some work done on the house. I was having to have new drains put in because of changes in climate. So I got all of my workmen together, and it's a rural area. They're good men, and I just said, "Look, I'm going to pay you up front, and the reason I'm going to pay you up front is I don't want to be in a situation that if the banks go tits up, I haven't got money to pay you." And they simply couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that I trusted them, that I would give them my money before they'd done the job. But what happened with that is the whole relationship changed. Their whole relationship with me changed, in that I wasn't just a client, I was a member of their community that was concerned for their well-being, about being able to feed their family. And what then happened is that my house became a house for the workmen to come and talk about crypto, talk about the financial system, what was happening, how can we support one another if there is a crash. So that's just anecdotal. When we take money out of the equation and we replace it with time and trust and connection, we have a very, very different ecosystem.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. I love that. Yeah. So I've just looking at the clock here. We've been going for 21 minutes, which is great. I know. Yeah, it's been good. So what we'll do is we'll leave this one here. Stay on the line. All I'll do is just wrap up this show. So if anybody's listening that enjoyed this little podcast with Julia, I will be doing more, and we're going to be going through the 9 points that she's written here for a community that needs to be cohesive, and the ingredients for it. So we discussed today intergenerational members, and just touched on a little bit of close proximity to relationship and nature and land and soil. But I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one. See you later.